Everybody's very welcome. Um, I'm Harriet Carty. I'm the director of Caring for God's Acre, and it's very nice to have so many people coming to this, our third of our land and nature webinars during Church's Count on Nature. We will be recording this. It is already being recorded, and we've turned off your mics and your cameras. So if you don't want to be recorded, that's all sorted. You don't need to do that. We've mainly done that for the sound quality. So we would love you to ask questions, but please could you type them into the chat? Pop the questions in as soon as they occur to you. You don't have to wait till the end. If Mike covers the subjects, we'll just go over that question. It won't matter at all. Just pop them in as soon as they occur to you. Later on today, or possibly in a few days' time, it may take not just today. Molly, who's doing the tech, will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everybody who's registered. So no need to make notes or write anything down. You'll be getting a recording very soon. And I'm now very excited to hand over to Mike Slater from Butterfly Conservation. He tells me he's been working for butterflies for over 60 years and working for churchyard butterflies for over 30. So it's hard to think of a more experienced expert to lead us through this subject of making our burial grounds a home for butterflies. So Mike, I'm now going to hand over to you. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much. Well, what am I going to talk about today and how important are burial grounds? Well, we're in a biodiversity crisis. I think everyone's aware of that. We've lost 97% of our meadows in the UK since the Second World War. But thankfully, a lot of those fragments of really good grassland survive in our burial grounds or churchyards. And that's what I'll be focusing on today. So first of all, I've broken the talk into three areas. The first one is I'm going to talk about sort of the routine practical management you can do to help wildlife and in particular butterflies. And then I'm going to also talk about those little extra things you can do to help our wildlife and butterflies. And finally, everyone wants to know is if I'm going to put all this effort in, does it work? So I'm also going to talk about what monitoring you might want to do on your burial grounds, churchyards, to see if it is working, because butterflies are the best terrestrial indicators. Because butterflies change, their populations change due to the weather on an annual or even through the year basis. They're very, very good and they're very, very sensitive to any changes we make, both positive and negative. So the first thing you can do is sometimes you can declare yourself a wildlife friendly church or burial ground. And I love this one. This is from a churchyard in Bilton in Warwickshire. And they've just stuck up this sign to say what they're doing, because often this sort of basic information, people say, well, why haven't you cut the grass? Why are you leaving this area? And sometimes a simple sign like this goes a long way to explaining what you're doing and why. And again, what I'm going to talk about is there's a couple of churchyards, at least I know of, in Warwickshire, one at Wormleighton and one at Marton, that actually their burial grounds are actually grazed by sheep. I have to put a caveat on this. The grasslands are part of a sheep field. So really, the grasslands, because they've been grazed heavily for a long time, are quite species poor. But in wildlife, what we say is grazing is always preferable to cutting. And that's because different grazing animals will graze areas sensitively in the different areas. And actually, cutting is not so sensitive as grazing. But I've got to say also that caveat is that probably 90+% of burial grounds are unsuitable for grazing. So in most cases, it is not really worth considering, but it's just an option to have at the back of your mind. I also talked about monitoring. Now, in Warwickshire, we monitor over 100 sites by what's called a butterfly transect. Now, less accurate, but equally as important, is a method we call reduced monitoring. Now, what we say is if you want to, on a burial ground, what we advocate is to go out in April, May, June, July, August, and September and actually count the number of butterflies you see of each individual species. And again, because you're only doing it once a month, what we say is pick, if you can, the best day of the month. And there's a lot of rules behind doing a transect to do with the weather. You know, it's got to be between 13 and 17 certain conditions, 17 with full sun, etc., etc. But what I say is don't make things too complicated. If you look out the window and you can see lots of butterflies flying, then the weather conditions are great and suitable to do this reduced monitoring. The other thing I'd advocate is actually splitting your monitoring or transect routes into sections, especially if you're doing some wildlife friendly management. So if you can imagine a churchyard, the basic thing to do is most churchyards have a path going around the circumference of the churchyard. So basically you split the church into 4 sections and you monitor the north, east, west, south areas of the churchyard. Now what that will show you quite quickly is your south facing and east facing parts of the church will have more butterflies than the west and north facing parts. So that's the first thing. Even if you walk around on a weekly basis, you'll work out. But there's quite a few churchyards in Warwickshire where they've now got an area put aside to help butterflies. And of course, if that is the case, it would be worth having an extra section that actually walks through or by that bit of conservation churchyard. And finally, even when you're doing it 6 times a year, it can be a big commitment. So again, what we advocate is it can be a great community thing. Often people like doing these monitorings in pairs. So if you walk around, have a bit of a chat, and you count the butterflies as you go, then what you can do is go around your local coffee shop, have a coffee, and discuss your findings. So that's what we advocate with monitoring. So I'm going to start at the very basics with burial grounds and churchyards. And I sort of advocate, if you think about this as the rungs of the ladder, you start at the very bottom. Somebody like myself, what I want you to do is go to the top of the ladder and do more for wildlife. But if you only want to do a minimum, then this is what happens. So quite rightly, burial grounds are quiet places of contemplation where people can be remembered. There's often association with evergreen trees because that's an association with eternal life. So if you've got a churchyard like this one with large yew trees, then you're going to get this butterfly always, especially if you've got little parts which have got long grass. And this species of butterfly is called the speckled wood. And so the minimum you'll have really in any burial ground is a speckled wood because it likes these semi-shady conditions with a bit of grass. Again, because of the connection to eternal life, most churchyards, from my experience, have holly and ivy. Now, this is the female holly tree with the berries. And often you get also, as I said, the ivy. It can grow up the walls of a churchyard like this, or most often it grows on the perimeter walls around the circumference of the churchyard. And when I go out in the autumn, I actually look for the caterpillars of a certain butterfly called the holly blue, because that's where often I will find the caterpillars feeding on the berries of the ivy. And also churchyards, because of their connection with eternal life, because they've got the connection with holly and ivy, these are the banker places to survey for finding the holly blue. The holly blue is an unusual butterfly. It's not quite in sync with its parasitic host, but a particular wasp. So as the wasp builds up its numbers, it sort of gets to a stage where the holly blue population crashes and you can hardly see any holly blues anywhere. But churchyards, because of this connection with eternal life, because they've got the holly and the ivy, is always, even in the poor years, a place for seeing holly blues, where the wider countryside, it's virtually impossible to find them. And again, most churchyards, probably about 50%, somewhere either in the perimeter or actually in the churchyard, like this one down at Stratford, have oak trees. If you have oak trees this tall, you will get this species of butterfly called the purple hair streak. I'm probably listening now to all you in the background. I've never seen a purple hair streak. We've got oak trees in our graveyard. And that is because all the hair streak butterflies, and particularly the purple hair streak, are very elusive. What happens is there's an association with many blues and hair streaks with ants. And what this butterfly does is caterpillar comes down to the ground and it's adopted by ants. They take them down to the ant nest and they stay there for a bit of safety in the ant nest, or the ants will tend them in nearby areas. So this will pupate in the leaf litter and the ants will come and find the pupa to attend it. And the pupa or caterpillars will secrete a sticky solution, and in return, the ants will protect them. So first of all, when they're down on the ground, you don't see them. But as soon as they emerge, they fly right to the tops of the oak trees, and there they stay. So that's why you don't see them. But if you go out in an evening in July, muggy evening especially, between 6:30 and 7:30, not the normal time you go out for seeing butterflies, if you look carefully, you'll see lots of silver discs flying around the tops of the oak trees. And these will be purple hair streaks. So really doing a minimum in a churchyard burial ground, you should get those three butterflies. And then we're starting to go up the rungs of the ladder. The next step is trying to provide nectar for these butterflies. Now, the most common way you can provide the nectar is to grow one of these, the buddleia or the butterfly bush. And this is from a place in Kyneton, the churchyard. And it's quite usual when I go around surveying churchyards, if they haven't done really very much for wildlife, somewhere there's a buddleia bush. Now, if you've got a buddleia bush, as its name implies, the butterfly bush, you will attract butterflies to it. The first one you may attract is this large white. Some people call it the cabbage white because actually its caterpillars do eat brassica plants. So if you're in an urban setting where people are growing brassica plants in their gardens or local allotments, this butterfly will be attracted into your church grounds to use the buddleia bush. If you're in a rural setting, equally, where the farmers are growing things like oilseed rape, sprouts, or other broccoli, brassica plants, it will again be attracted into the churchyard for nectar. Now, this is a butterfly that's also unusual, that though we have a resident population, what happens in about July most years is our population is supplemented from migrations from the continent. So a lot of people don't realise there's an awful lot of species of butterfly that migrate. And this is the one that comes over from continental Europe into the UK. And that's why numbers pick up normally from July onwards. Very similarly, its close cousin, the small white, does exactly the same. This is, again, it's another species that actually attacks brassica plants. But again, normally from July onwards, you get lots of these butterflies coming in. And if you notice very carefully, if I just go back, what I want you to notice is the really black tips you can see through the hindwings there and the black spots. This is a female large white. But actually, when you go to the small white, you see it's really a mucky yellow colour and you can't see the dark black tips. And this is how you tell these two species apart. Fortunately, the buddleia bush, as this picture shows, attracts more colour for butterflies. And the peacock here is one of our adult butterflies that hibernates through the winter. And again, the Victorians were great when they named our butterflies. Because of the eyes on this butterfly, they named it the peacock, as in the peacock bird. So again, this butterfly often, it breeds on nettles, which I'll show you some pictures of later, but also it's attracted to your burial grounds if you have the right nectar sources. Equally, this is another butterfly that hibernates as an adult through the winter. This is called the comma. And hopefully you can see my cursor. If you see this white mark on the hindwings, that's where people think that's the shape of a comma. So again, that's where it gets its name. And if you look at these scalloped wings here, all around here, if you can imagine this butterfly either hibernating as an adult in a hollow of an oak tree with lots of oak leaf litter, it's virtually impossible to find. But you can find this if you have log piles in your churchyard, or even sometimes it will hibernate in outbuildings as well. So it's another butterfly you can help by providing hibernation places for it. Another butterfly that's attracted to churchyards is the small tortoiseshell. And again, it's on red valerian here. Now, red valerian is another great summer nectar source. Obviously, it's normally associated with gardens, but again, often you get escapes into churchyards or even road verges. So it's a good nectar source for all sorts of butterflies and bees. Unfortunately, this butterfly has declined very rapidly in the last 10, 20 years. And this is a result of climate change. It's not because of the weather patterns, it's because climate change has encouraged another parasite from continental Europe to come into the UK. It's called Sturmabella. Now, if you can imagine a butterfly, all butterfly species have parasitic wasps or flies that attack them in the caterpillar stage. So this butterfly has got 2 parasitic wasps, but now because of Sturmabella coming into the country, it's now got 3 parasites that attack it. So instead of perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 caterpillars getting through to adults in a normal case, now fewer than probably 2 are getting through. So this population is in decline. It's adapting though, and there's hope on the horizon. So certainly we've seen this in continental Europe, that this butterfly is virtually becoming a montane species found in mountains, because as you go up higher, the air cools and Sturmabella parasite can't cope. So this is still as common as it once was in the mountain areas of Europe. And for those listening from Scotland saying, I still see hundreds of these around in Orkney or wherever, that's because obviously Scotland generally is cooler in winter than England. So again, it's less affected by this parasite because the parasite basically found its way to the Midlands. So it affects the small tortoiseshell in the Midlands and South England, but not further north. So again, it's another adaptation to climate change. Another fascinating adaptation it's doing is actually this butterfly has 2 broods. So the first brood comes out in June, and the second brood, it comes out in sort of July, August time. And what some very clever scientists in Sweden have found is this butterfly is actually missing its second brood and going straight into hibernation in June, and therefore avoiding this parasite Sturmabella, which tends to affect the caterpillars July onwards. But there's also a bad thing about going into hibernation early. If you're going to hibernation earlier, you're more likely to be predated by things like blue tits and great tits. So it has to balance this out. But it's interesting to see evolution in action with this species. Another species that can hibernate as an adult, but really is mainly a migrant, is this species, the red admiral. And this flies normally into the country in July time onwards from continental Europe. Usually there's a lot about at the moment. So we've had some early migrations, and those in southeast England will probably remember reports of Saharan winds with their dust. And that's brought over a lot of migrants early this year. And this picture also reminds me to say how good ivy is as a nectar source. And those who are parents, grandparents, this is a great thing to do with your kids. If you've got ivy in your churchyard growing up a wall or up a tree, it hasn't been cut down because we never advocate that. Go and stand your young grandson or son against the bark of the tree. Get them to close their eyes for a minute and listen, because a lot of kids don't do that nowadays. And what you'll find is you can actually hear terrific noise above your head coming from the bees nectaring on the ivy blossom, just proving how really valuable this nectar source is. And then get your grandson's son to come away from the tree and then look up. And occasionally what they'll see is a flash of wings. It might be orange of the comma, or actually the red from the red admiral. It's a really great, wonderful wildlife experience to give a young child. But also, if you're managing a churchyard, hopefully that will enthuse you not to chop your ivy down and keep it, because it's such a fabulous nectar resource. Another species of migratory butterfly is the painted lady. Now, it goes back to North Africa in the winter, and there it will feed, because it's damper in the winter, in the Atlas Mountains, on things like mallows and thistles. And then in the spring, if we have a wet spring in the Atlas Mountains, and we appear to have one this year, the parasites again will build up, and this will be a trigger for this butterfly to migrate. Now, normally, painted ladies will fly to southern Spain, then to northern Spain, then to southern France, then to northern France, and then over to UK, each time having a new brood. But occasionally, you can tell the difference between painted ladies. If, as opposed to this very pink one, you've got a salmon-coloured butterfly, this has probably flown in one flight, 1,000 miles, all the way from the Atlas Mountains to southern England. And there's a lot of evidence for that happening this year, because we've had some very early migrations, the same as with the Red Admiral. You also might be very lucky, if you've got a buddleia in your churchyard, to have this spectacular moth coming to it. This is a hummingbird hawk moth. Now, we get quite a few reports saying, I've had a hummingbird in my garden or in my wherever. But it's not, it's a hummingbird hawk moth. And again, fortunately, this year, it seems to be a very good year, because we've had a lot of early reports of this moth. And if you see this on buddleia, red valerian, you can stand there for 10 minutes. It's really fantastic to watch it hovering above the flowers, going from flower head to flower head, just taking the nectar. Now I'm going to move into those little extra things you can start thinking about to do with your burial ground. How can you really do this little bit extra to help butterflies and other wildlife? Well, the first thing I'll say is, I don't know of a burial ground that doesn't have a compost heap where all the cuttings from the grass that's cut aren't put. Well, what I'd encourage you to do is actually encourage nettles to actually grow around that compost heap. And if they grow through the compost heap, as you cut it the following year, just put the compost on top of the nettles. Now, compost, as its name implies, enriches the ground below. And that's what these caterpillars like who feed on nettle. They like very, very enriched nettles. In fact, a lot of the old archaeologists, when they're going around surveying for old habitations, will look for evidence of nettle beds, because it's evidence of human habitation. Because if we've made nettle beds from our waste, it's a sign of, say, we've been there in the past. But if you do this, what you could have is the peacock butterfly or the small tortoiseshell butterfly laying its eggs on those nettles, and the caterpillars will then eat the nettles. And the peacock is on the left of the screen. These are better views, and this is a nest of peacock larvae. Now, butterflies have two strategies to get from an egg to an adult butterfly. One is to have a solitary caterpillar, and most species that have solitary caterpillars, they have green caterpillars, and that's because they can hide away in the vegetation, away from birds and other predators, and try and get through to an adult. Or the other tactic is to have a web or a bunch of caterpillars that grow up together. Now, what the reason they do this is, they've underneath the caterpillars there, you can't see it quite clearly, but it's a silken web. And the caterpillars are using that basically as a sunbed. They will sit on that silken web, and because they're black, they absorb heat more quickly. And if you absorb heat more quickly as a cold-blooded animal, you grow more quickly, you digest your food more quickly, and therefore it's great. You tend to get from egg to an adult butterfly much quicker than a solitary caterpillar. But there's a negative as well, like most things. If you know from kids at school, if one catches a cold, they all catch a cold. So same with the caterpillars here. If one catches some sort of bacterial or viral disease, more of them die. And that's why in warm summers, we get more caterpillars getting through to adults, and in wet, cool summers, we get less getting through. So it's a choice between evolution, what you use, a solitary caterpillar life or a group caterpillar life. And just to show you what a small tortoiseshell larval nest is like, that's what it looks like. And to say from previous slides, you know that these are getting far rarer to find. I used to find loads when I was a youngster. And again, I'm going to move back to probably doing a little in your churchyard to help bees and butterflies. And that little involves actually thinking of the shrubs or the short trees going round your churchyard as a nectar source. And two of the most important there on the top left is blackthorn or sloe, and the bottom right there is pussy willow or goat willow. And really, they are fantastic nectar sources, especially. Just got to watch them in early spring, full of bees and butterflies. So again, when you're managing your churchyards, if you're going to cut back overhanging blackthorn or pussy willow, you've got to do it really in September or October. Don't wait to the spring, because if you wait to the spring, the plant won't have time enough to actually grow the flowers needed by the butterflies and bees. So just changing that little quirk in your management will help butterflies, bees. Now, there's a very clever person in Warwickshire called Steve Falk. He's a national expert on solitary bees and bees in general. And what he's come up with is what he calls the Warwickshire blossom sequence. Now, though you tweak this as you go further north and other parts of the country, this basic blossom sequence is what you need to try and do. And it's all about having a shrub or tree species that will provide nectar from early spring until about June. Now, the other important thing is, if you're trying to do this blossom sequence, all the blossoms need to be in 1 square kilometre, because these solitary bees can't travel too far. And again, if you think about bees travelling, the more they have to travel to a nectar source, the more the chances they're going to be eaten by a bird or something. So if all these nectar sources are close together, then it narrows the chances of them being predated. So again, this nectar source, I won't read them all out, but basically it's providing a nectar source from late February, March, all the way through to June. Now, if you're thinking, well, how can I do this? Well, a lot of people want to not only commemorate a birth, death, and marriage, but they want to often plant a tree. Now, one of the trees we'd encourage them to plant, and often there's space in a graveyard for doing this, is planting one of those blossom sequence. You can see here a crabapple has been planted, and this is in Bilton Church in Rugby. Other species you can plant, and I'll come on to this later, are things like disease-resistant elm. But again, it's trying to think about your churchyard and its potential, and how can I now at least provide a service station, a nectar source, all the way through spring and summer for butterflies, bees. Now I'm going to talk about some basic management to consider. And again, I mentioned this earlier, a burial ground is a place of quiet contemplation. It's where people can go respect their loved ones. So how can I actually manage to keep that respect, but also manage it for wildlife? Now, this is Tysoe Church in southern Warwickshire. And if you look carefully, what they've done there is they've first of all mown a strip of grass down here next to the footpath, and then mown a strip of grass here through the wildflower area, which they're trying to create. Now, lots of places I work with land managers, and by doing this, people can't really come along and say that churchyard, that bit of grassland has been abandoned. By just cutting those verges, it makes the areas look cared for. And again, if you've got people with active graves, the other thing you can do is actually, again, cut round those active graves where relatives visit, and perhaps the more abandoned graves around the churchyard can be left to wildlife, but with perhaps paths around the churchyard. So some of the basic cutting, again, the important thing here is you don't cut till mid-August, and you've got that 6-week window to cut the grass between mid-August and the end of September. Now, the reason you do that, if you cut earlier, most of the things you're trying to save or encourage are invertebrates, and the invertebrates won't have had time to complete their life cycle. So there'll be mass casualties if you cut earlier than mid-August. If you cut after the end of September, you're going to affect your botanical diversity, because the flowers will have dropped their seed, the grass will be too long, the flower seed won't go down to the ground. So over time, it will rot, and over time, your botanical diversity will go down. So that's why you have this 6-week window to cut your grasses, wildflower areas. Now we're going to talk about actually doing active things to make your burial grounds better. I mentioned this several times, being a service station for bees and butterflies. Well, the first rule is you've got to provide nectar sources from the early spring all the way through to late autumn. And I've talked about that already by using shrubs. But it's nice to actually have showy wildflowers in your churchyard. And so in early spring, I always encourage, increasing the amount of primrose or increasing the amount of bugle. Unfortunately, in Warwickshire, certainly a lot of our churchyards have primrose growing in them. And these are, again, both great nectar sources for butterflies and bees. As you move into summer, I always encourage things like common knapweed and ragged robin. And there's a churchyard down near Ratley, near Kyneton, that actually has got a wildflower area and got both these species in it. So again, it's a real hub for insects as you walk through the churchyard when I'm surveying. And finally, it's a really good late nectar source. This is Devil's Bit scabious. And this is another vital nectar source because it's one of the most late flowering plants you can have. And so again, if you've got this in your churchyard, is encouraging it to grow. And again, in some churchyards like Aldeburgh Churchyard, which we help Jane O'Dell manage, what we do here is mow round the scabious when we're putting the grass for her in the summer, because it's late flowering. We want to keep that flower later and then cut it as one off later on. So it's sometimes tweaking your management against these basic rules I'm going to give you today. Now, again, I'm going to talk about some of the minimum stuff. Now, most churchyards, all of them obviously got a perimeter. A lot of those perimeters have got walls or hedgerows, and in those hedgerows, a lot of it, they've got bramble growing through. Now, bramble flowers are some of the most fantastic nectar sources. They start flowering about now in June, and again go right up to September. Now, what you've got to avoid then is actually cutting back your hedgerow in the summer. And again, if you cut it in the spring, actually, you might be cutting a criminal offence because you're disturbing birds. But the idea is have a hedgerow. Don't cut the first sort of 30 centimetres outside the hedgerow, so you've got this longer grass. And if you have longer grass, you will have colonies of these two species, meadow brown and gatekeeper. And the meadow brown is on the left and the gatekeeper is on the right. And just by not cutting that much grass into your hedgerows or around your perimeter of your church and encouraging bramble, you will get these two species. You will also get this species, the ringlet. And this is more a damp-loving species. Again, because of shade in churchyards, often the ringlet is pretty common. And again, go back to what the Victorians did. If you look at these rings down the outside of the underside of the wing of a ringlet, again, what the bills in Victorian times had little plaits with cloth around them making ringlets. And this is why the Victorians named this butterfly the ringlet. Now, again, if you leave that margin of grass around the perimeter of your churchyard, very minimal, I would say, to actually helping nature. Or if you have a wildlife area, and I mentioned there's a couple of churches like the way at Ratley and other places which have actually had a wildlife butterfly area, you will have these three golden skippers colonising your churchyard because they're all like this longer grass because it's their caterpillar food plant. The first one here is the large skipper, and this one is what you'll see now. It comes out in June and flies to the end of June, really, a bit later on. But what I want to show you here is these lines across the male's forewings, and these are called sec brands. It's where it's got the underground scales or its pheromones are stored. And when the male flies around a female, it scatters these pheromones all around the female to make it more attractive. So if you see a golden skipper in June, it's 99% it's going to be a large skipper. If you see a golden skipper in July, it's one of these two species, small skipper here and Essex skipper here. Now, these are tricky to tell apart. And again, it's something with experience you get better at. So this is a female small skipper here. Small skippers generally come out a week before the Essex skippers. That's the first clue. Now, if this was a male small skipper, what it would have is a small black line, no more than that, parallel to this wing edge, sex band there, and that makes it a male Essex skipper. The other way of telling them apart is the antennae. This one here is the Essex skipper, and it looks like a black sucker has been put on the end of the antennae because it's jet black, whereas you look at the small skipper, it's sort of a diffused black or often orange. So those are the way you tell them apart. But we do appreciate that takes a bit of practice to tell these two skippers apart. Now, I'm going to go on now to getting really to the top of this ladder of trying to make your churchyard the best you can possibly make. I've already mentioned Aldborough Church several times. Now, this is a picture of Aldborough Church, and actually you can see the Devil's Bit Scabious in the foreground. And Butterfly Conservation, in partnership with Jane O'Dell, who looks after the church, have been managing this now for a number of years. And this is really, how do we know that Aldborough Churchyard is that good? Well, the first thing we do with any grassland is we look to see if it's got 5 indicator species of butterfly in it. The first species is the common blue. Now, with a little effort, most churchyards can get this species to breed in it because the butterfly likes fairly short grass. Its caterpillar feeds on common birdsfoot trefoil, also black medic and red clover, which again are often common plants of grassland. So with a bit of care, most churchyards should be able to get that species. And as you can see there, the males on the left and the females on the right. Now, another species that's associated with shorter grasslands is the small copper. This is a lovely butterfly, about pound coin size, and its caterpillars feed on common sorrel or sheep sorrel. But again, because of the ancient nature of a lot of grasslands and churchyards, most churchyards should really have this species. But this species also, the males are very territorial, and it's one of those species where if it's in your churchyard, it's difficult to miss because the males will fly up and intercept any other butterfly that's flying nearby, or even stupidly fly up and try and intercept a dragonfly which can eat it. So and then it goes back to its perch if it hasn't been eaten. So again, they're very visible in your churchyard, and you can see their lovely copper colour. The next species, which again certainly in the Midlands and southern England has become more common, is the brown argus. Now again, due to climate change, there's another species that's interesting because it used to be a species that only found on chalk grasslands because its caterpillars only fed on a plant called rock rose. But again, because of evolution in progress and habitat change, it's now feeding on what we call cranesbill species, cut-leaf and dove's foot cranesbill, and also common storksbill, which often are found in the waste areas around churchyards. So again, a lot of churches actually now have that species breeding in their grounds. And you tell it apart from the common blue because it's a darker chocolatey brown. And again, you tend to see only one female for every 10 males, you see. That's a rule in the butterfly world. But this brown argus, you see these orange, what we call luneals, are all the way down the wings, on the forewings. And if this is probably not good English, but there's a spot missing here, which occurs in the common blue, which is not on the brown argus. And here you have 2 spots on the brown argus, and in the common blue you only have 1. So again, it's another tricky species to identify. But again, this butterfly also looks very silvery in flight. And once you've seen one in that silvery flight, you don't forget it, and you can tell that from the common blue. Next 2 species are species of brown butterfly, even though this one is black and white. And both species feed on finer grasses or fescue grasses. And this is the marbled white. And again, it's found from anywhere south of Yorkshire. Main food plant is creeping red fescue. And this is a test of how you manage your grasslands, because if you have long fescue grasses, you'll get this species colonizing. But if you cut your grass too early, that happens a lot. Certainly in our traditional hay meadows were cut in July. This species is hardly ever found in hay meadows. And if you cut your grasslands, again, unfortunately, this happens far too early in July, you'll never have this butterfly in your burial ground. So again, just by tweaking when you cut the grass, you can encourage this one species in it. And the final of the 5 indicated species is the small heath. And this is like short fescue grasses like sheep's fescue or red fescue. And also this is nice because if you manage the grasslands as we recommend, so you have these fringes along paths cut short and other places cut short, this is the butterfly that will colonise your churchyard and breed in those short grass areas where the marble white will breed in the long grass areas. So again, we like diversity. And by doing this diversity of management in your burial ground, you'll encourage much more species. Again, I'm going to move on to perhaps doing that little bit extra for your churchyard. And this is a species called lady smock or cuckoo flower. And this is quite an easy plant to grow. So if you pick the leaves off this plant and you put them on a kitchen roll that you've dampened, eventually, if you keep it damp, the leaves will sprout roots, and then you can transfer them into a compost type solution and then plant them out later. They're like open grassland, damp grassland. So you can increase the amount of cuckoo flower around your churchyard. And we'd advocate this because I'll show you a picture in a minute. There's a wonderful butterfly called the orange tip that uses this plant. Now, the orange tip is unusual, again, very interesting to study. When a female lays an egg, it's this colour down here, it's sort of yellowy white. And as the days pass, the eggs change to this orangey colour. Now, at the same time, when it lays an egg, the female will put chemical markers, pheromones, over the plant to tell other female butterflies not to lay there. And the colour also is seen by these butterflies that tell it not to lay there. But you can see in this one picture, this process hasn't worked. And because we've got a Cain and Abel situation here, the first caterpillar, which will be one of those red eggs to hatch out, will eat the others. Because the reason they do that is there's not sufficient seed heads on the cuckoo flower for the caterpillar to eat and get through to adulthoods. So it can't cope with any competition. So it's got to eat the other caterpillars. Another food plant it uses frequently is garlic mustard. And again, it's reasonably common plant along hedgerows in the UK. And again, about now it's going to seed. So this is another plant. You can actually go out with a bag, collect some seed, take them back home, and actually then transfer the seed into a paper bag. That's important. And then you put the paper bag on your kitchen windowsill for the seed to dry out. And then you take it back to your burial ground. And what you do is you take a pinch of the black brownie seeds. That means about 12 to 20. You make a scrape with a trowel in the scrubby area or your perimeter around your churchyard, and you put the seeds into the way you've made the scrape with a trowel. Then you put your forefinger on top of the seed to make sure it's got good contact with the soil. Most importantly, you don't cover the seed. And then next year, you'll have lots more plants of this garlic mustard. And if you have lots more plants of the garlic mustard, you will have more orange tips. Again, Victorians, it's got an orange tip, we'll call it an orange tip. But again, I love the underside of the orange tip male there, which is really green and mottled. The other species you'll be helping is also the green vein white. Again, often gets mistaken for cabbage white, but when you look at it closely, you see these green veins over the underside of the wings. And I put up here the 2 colour forms of the green vein white, the white with the green veins and the yellow with the green veins. And actually, once you get your eye in, this butterfly tends to fly low to the ground in a zigzag flight, whereas the 2 whites I showed you earlier, the small and large white, tend to be more directional. They fly in a straight line quite high up as well. So once you get to know these things, you virtually get to know which butterfly you're watching. And it's important if I'm giving you any advice, that what I'm telling you works. So what I want you to look down here is this column here. Now, I've been managing a transect at Wrightwood Meadows for 37 years. And you can see here in the first 5 years, the average number of orange tips I saw for the whole year was 5. But by the last recording period, 2015 to 19, I was actually seeing nearly 14 orange tips. So the number had increased, not too much. But this year already, I've seen 26 orange tips on the transect, so we know it's working. What we did was, this was a place I monitored. It was an ex-gravel site. Then it was turned into a landfill site. And then in 2007 became a nature reserve for butterfly conservation. It was then put into a thing called high-level stewardship, a farming subsidy that helps you manage land to help nature. And then about 8-10 years later, we planted 1.5 kilometres of new hedgerow. And as we planted that hedgerow and layered it, we also seeded it with garlic mustard. So you can see how these positive measures, first of all, putting the hedgerow in and then seeding it, has helped the orange tip. So really, that's the importance of monitoring. You can actually see what you're monitoring has actually worked. And hence, that's why we're encouraging to monitor the churchyards as well. Another species it's worth monitoring is the brimstone butterfly. And here you see a brimstone female laying on older buckthorn. It's got two caterpillar food plants, alder and purging buckthorn. The majority of places use older buckthorn. This species is found probably as north as Lancashire and Yorkshire. But if you plant this species, the brimstone will find it. And that's a certainty. So again, there's various projects around the country where various wildlife, butterfly conservation people have been deliberately planting buckthorn to encourage this butterfly. It's also our longest living butterfly. It certainly can live 10, if not 11 months, and maybe even into 12 months. So it's another butterfly that hibernates as an adult through winter. Another great thing to do with young children is get them to find the eggs of the brimstone. Once you've got a buckthorn bush growing in a nice sunny position, what you do is you look underneath the leaves in the sort of near the top of the plant where it's nice and nutritious, and good chances you'll find the eggs, these conical eggs on the underside of the leaf. And believe me, it gets embarrassing once you've shown a child how to find these. They find more than you. I'm supposed to be an expert and they find more than these. Embarrassing. Then later on, what you can do with a child is get them to find the caterpillars. Now, when the caterpillars hatch and start munching the leaves, what they do in the daytime is actually lie across the leaf like this along the midrib. You can see how wonderfully camouflaged they are after having a nibble of the leaf, perhaps that night. So again, it's a great thing to get kids to do, especially in their summer holidays. Again, this is another bit of advice. Does it work? Because that's important. So again, I'll take you down to this bottom chart, and you can see here in the first 5 years of the transect, on average, in the year's surveying, I've monitored 6 brimstones. For the time of the last monitoring, 2015 to 19, I was up to basically 65 a year, a great increase. But I can tell you it's even still increasing. This year I've had already over 100 brimstones. And this is because in those 1.5 kilometres of hedgerow, we planted 1,000 older buckthorns. So again, it's this principle. If you plant it, the brimstone will find it, and eventually the population will build up and increase. And it's a really good wildlife thing to do anywhere, let alone on reserves like Wildwood Meadows, but also in your churchyards. We talked about planting the odd tree in a burial ground, but also often around the outside of a burial ground, and certainly one near Kyneton. There's a burial ground there which has wych elm around the circumference. Actually, it's near Gaydon, and it's got a colony of a butterfly I'll show you in a minute called a white-letter hairstreak. Now, wych elm is more disease-resistant than common English elm. You can see that in hedgerows. After a time, the large Dutch elm beetle gets in and attacks the elms, but later on, it kills the elms, but the butterfly itself moves around the fields as other elms become available and become the right size. Now, again, this is another species. You can see the flower head down here with the seeds in the middle. You can actually grow yourself. And only about 1 in 40 of these seeds will be viable. So if you go and collect this seed, which is about in May time, basically pinch the seed between your forefinger and your thumb. If you can feel resistance, i.e. the seed, then take those home with you. If you can't feel anything, then just discard them. And then take them home and again, put these seeds on a bit of loam or compost type material and that will grow it on. And once it's grown on, repot it. And then if you've got a seed bed, put it in there. In that case, just grow it on to it's about 2-3 foot high, and then you've got a young wych elm to plant out. And say, if you plant those out, what you'll get is that beautiful butterfly, the white-letter hair streak. Now, nationally, this is very rare, or considered very rare, but it's probably underreported. A few years ago, it actually reached Scotland, southern Scotland. And places like Warwickshire, which have got elm all over the place, used to be called Shakespeare's weed. Then we've got white-letter hair streak all over. Also, we planted over 500 disease-resistant elms to help this butterfly. So again, if you're considering planting an elm, I'd encourage you to plant one of the cultivars of disease-resistant elm, and we recommend 7 different varieties depending on the location. And once the elm has got to about 5 meters high, it should be colonized by this lovely butterfly, the white-letter hair streak. The other thing to think of, and I mentioned this earlier, churches and outbuildings of churches are normally great places for butterflies to hibernate, particularly the peacock and the small tortoiseshell. Peacock's on the left there, small tortoiseshell on the right. Now, I do deny this story, but I did get myself into trouble during my daughter's wedding. They caught me when I was giving her away, looking up at the ceilings where I had found a small tortoiseshell hibernating in the church roofs. And my daughter accused me of not paying attention to her getting married rather than hibernating butterflies. But I say I deny that vigorously. Now, the final stage you can do with your burial ground is that little bit extra and spread the love, as we call it. Now, again, this is Oldborough Churchyard. And this is after we've cut it in August. And what we've done, as opposed to composting all the grass cuttings, is actually remove them into builder's bags. Now, the reason for this is we're going to take this green hay, as we call it, to other sites. We've taken this green hay to Tysoe Churchyard, where they're trying to improve their wildflower areas, and also a church in Morton Morrell. Now, the key is the site you're taking it to has to be prepared, so you have to cut that area where the grass cuttings are going to go before you deliver it. And then you spread the grass, like Tara is, one of my volunteers, over the area where you're trying to encourage. And the reason green hay is better than seeding is because in that green hay is all sorts of mini beast bacteria and fungi. So you're taking the whole ecosystem with you in the green hay. And then you leave it down on the ground for about 5-7 days for it to dry out. Then the seeds have dried out and they've gone into the ground. So you get a much better variety of seed. And in certain cases, you might have to cut and take the green hay to a site in different periods of the year, so you're taking different wildflowers. But the principle there is you spread it out. And also, if you notice carefully, what Tara is doing is actually treading down the grass. And if you were doing this with a field, you'd call it aftermath grazing. That's what you do with cattle. They come in and graze and stomp the grass cuttings in to the ground, create a new wildflower area. But we can do the same thing just with your feet. So that's another thing to consider once you've got your grasslands into a great condition. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Mike, that was fantastic. Goodness me, there's so much there to think about, and I love the way you took it from just doing a little thing to doing a great deal. So there really is something there for everybody. Absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to. Mike's very kindly said he doesn't mind staying on if other people can as well. They're very welcome to. Completely appreciate that some people may need to leave, but we have had quite a few questions, so I'm just whizzing back to see where I can start to find questions rather than just hello. Kathy asked for a blank copy of the monitoring chart, please. I think that would be something that perhaps if you sent us a PDF of that, Mike, we could send that out with the recording.
No problem at all.
Oh, and we've asked, what is the reason for using soy sauce to feed the butterfly?
Okay, right. Somebody's obviously interested in purple emperor butterflies. So the various species of butterfly, the most notable is the purple emperor. And the males come down to gross things like dog poo, but they also come down to other substances you can put down. rather than soy sauce, I'd actually advocate Malaysian shrimp paste.
Okay.
And what you need to do with that Malaysian shrimp paste, and the Purple Emperor season won't be many weeks away, is to put that in a warm window. That'll stink your house out. Or probably better in your car, to stink your car out, and then put it down. Because when it's really rotten and horrible, then you put it down the ground, and the males during between about 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning, in the end of July, first week of July, so end of June, first week of July, will come down to that if you put them in a nice sunny location.
And is that the south of England only for purple emperors, or is
Right,
that
yeah, the purple emperor's now spread to the Midlands. So, for instance,
okay?
it's probably all over Warwickshire. So, probably anywhere from South Derbyshire south is a place to do that.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you to Falguni for that question. Um, Kerry asked which was the butterfly on the red valerian. I think that was a small tortoise shell,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
small tortoiseshell, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Below, I see that Catherine's answered that. Thank you very much. And Christine asks, is white valerian as good as red, please? It's much less
Um,
common as a sort of garden weed, isn't it? It
yeah,
doesn't
it
spread.
is, yeah.
Right?
Um, they will use white valerian, but I would say it's not as good because butterflies can see in colour, and often they have a preference colour. Most species have a preferential colour, and red's normally more preferred by butterflies than white. It's the same as buddleia. Yes, butterflies will use white buddleia, but they prefer the mauve coloured buddleia.
Right. And yes, so we've got a few people who've seen things, so that's good. Gina's telling us what she's seen in Ludlow. But Annette has seen hummingbird hawk moths on echiums in Devon. And I was thinking that's a particularly good plant, isn't it? The
It is, yes, yeah,
oranges and the Viper's bugloss and those.
yeah,
Yeah, I would say if you're going to plant one thing in your flower bed
yeah.
in your churchyard, maybe choose Viper's bugloss. Really spectacular. Um, we had quite a bit of chat from the people in Scotland, which is very nice to see you sort of chatting to each other and sharing good tips. But Katrina asks whether in the far north of Scotland they should cut earlier or later, because of course the season is slower to get going, but then the autumn is quicker to come in, and everything grows faster, doesn't it, with the long sunny days as well that you do get in the North
Well,
Coast.
first of all, what an excellent question. Generally, the more north you go, I would say the butterflies come out later, so you have to cut later, which is quite rightly identified that also winter comes in earlier.
Mm.
And this is really, I would say, a judgment call. I went to a conference about small blue in Inverness recently, and that was a topic that came up. And the best advice I could give is you sometimes got to use your gut. If you think, I know the principle is when the butterflies have they completed their life cycle, then it's safe to think about start cutting the grass.
Mm.
And the great thing about monitoring, if you monitor, that should tell you if you've got it right. So the other advice I'd have is if you've got a particular place, is 1 year try and just cut half of it. And if you can, monitor both halves and see which one works best.
I think that also raises another sort of interesting thing about cutting half, which is, if everybody leaves their grassland until mid-August, unless they've done a spring cut, in many parts of the country, that will then start to go to rank grass, won't it? So perhaps if you're able to leave it later, or you've got late flowering things like scabious, you need to do a spring cut. You may not be able to have, you know, daffs and cowslips and scabious in the same place, but you can have it in the same site by doing a little mosaic of different things. But there is
Hopefully, I
there is
said
often the conflict, isn't there? It is difficult, as you pointed out. Hay is cut too early for butterflies.
the variation is the key. And we've found some of the variation, but I mentioned about small heath, cutting those sort of edges that make them look careful, and then leaving other areas. That variation in cut is important.
Mm.
And again, it might be also we find in especially woodlands, if we do a cut in late February, early March, uh, to get the site ready, that's actually helping things that come and flower later in March and April. The main one is that again, we're also adapting our management recommendations because of climate change.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our winters are now wetter and warmer, so that gives the grass a great kickstart in the spring, and that's suppressing a lot of our wildflowers. So actually, by doing an early cut in late February, March, that can actually suppress the grasses and give things like your primroses and your violets a better chance to get going in a month or so's time. So I think overall, what I've said today is sometimes it's cut things different times in different places, but also monitor what you're doing and watch what you're doing to see which one works best for you.
The other species that really benefits from short grass in spring is yellow rattle as well. If the grass isn't short when that germinates, they can just wither and die because they don't get enough sun before they've attached to grass roots to start to draw nutrients from there. So that's another one that you can lose your yellow rattle if
Yeah, I didn't mention yellow rattle, but yeah, yeah.
Catherine gives a good bit of advice for Scotland, which is that if the hay rattle, the yellow rattle rattles, then it's ready for cutting, which is I think also another good one to look out for and try out in your area in your conditions, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you lose me, I'm losing my computer, I think. But with the yellow rattle, what they say is when it's coloured nut brown and you can hear the rattle, it's then ready to cut. And a lot of people do lose their yellow rattle by cutting too early. So again, this is something perhaps in Scotland you would cut later, but she's quite right. You've got to hear the rattle and it's got to be nut brown before you cut it.
Helen asks an interesting question, which is what percentage of butterflies are migrants?
Right, out of the 59 species we've got in the UK, 3 are considered migrants. That's the cloudy yellow, the painted lady, and the red apple. There are other rare migrants, but they come in every 10 years or so, and also they're often confined to southeast England. So I haven't included those. Now, on top of that, there are lots of other species that will move around the countryside in a migratory way. So sometimes even the purple hairstreak I mentioned, you'll get a cloud of those occasionally, and it'll fly out of a wood to another wood, say 10 kilometres away to colonise. You'll get other species like the large white and small white that will migrate each summer to come over to the UK. So like a lot of things in nature, there's no hard and fast rule. But if you wanted a rule, we've got 3 migrants.
No, thank you. Christine's asking whether polyantheses are as good as primroses as an early nectar source.
Yes, there are. Obviously, a bit later on, you get the cowslips.
Yeah.
And again, we get primulas often, which are either coming from gardens or they've hybridized with the primroses in your churchyard. As a rule, we try and advocate for native wildflowers, not garden escapes. Though, again, I mentioned the valerian, I mentioned the buddleia. Sometimes you say, no, I'm going to have that. But generally, rule of thumb, we don't encourage the planting of garden escapes in any type of wild setting.
Yeah, yeah. I think churchyards are a lovely mixture, aren't they? Because often there'll be flower beds or planters or hanging baskets or something like that, or people will plant things on graves. But if that grassland can really stay native, it's so lovely, isn't it? And there's so many species of other invertebrates associated with the many different things in a native species rich meadow.
But
Susanna.
I'll also be pragmatic that, would I rather have a nectar source in a churchyard, even if it is a garden escape or garden planted? Yes, because it's better than what probably is there. So, yeah, pragmatism is also a good rule.
Yeah, no, thank you. Suzanne has got garlic mustard in the garden and has spotted 4 orange tip caterpillars on one plant, and so wonders whether in that instance there are enough seeds to feed them all, or maybe do they only eat each other when they're either eggs or very young, or will they tuck into each other, or do they move about, or
Yeah, the general rule is they eat each other when they're younger. But again, what I do is look at that plant and literally count how many seed heads are left. You'd have to keep a close eye on it And if she's got more garlic mustard, I'd be very tempted to move one of the caterpillars to another plant because my gut feeling is when they get really big, there won't be enough seed heads on that plant to keep 4 of them alive.
When could, if one did need to cut back the garlic mustard, if it was in a place where you just couldn't really leave it, tall with seed heads, when could you cut it back without destroying the caterpillars?
Right. So the caterpillars, again, when you get your eye, are normally fairly obvious. The danger is actually sometimes the caterpillars will pupate on their garlic mustard itself. It looks like a small triangle. So as you're cutting it down, I'd say you cut it down with a pair of secateurs, one at a time. And it's a good thing to just double check there's no chrysalis on that garlic mustard head. And then if it is, you've got to sort of move it, if you can, to another place where it can emerge the next spring. Better still to check it before you cut it down. But yes, I've got garlic mustard in my garden, and I have to do that each year.
Another thing that I've tried, I don't know what you think about this, is to just bend it in half, so it's far less visible, but actually the plant, the plant is all still there, even if the caterpillar or the pupa is upside down.
That's a very good idea. I might try that myself.
Give it a go. Linda, I think Linda had to leave. I think she said she was going to have to leave earlier, but says fantastic presentation and look forward to receiving recording to reabsorb so much in one go. I'm sure we'd all echo that. Is it possible to have contact information for Mike if he's willing to help, if need to receive guidance with any situation or needing reassurance to correct action, please?
Yeah, you've got my email. By all means, send it out. I'm quite used to giving people advice over email, so that's fine.
I would also just point out that online, and you may also have this in hard copy, many of you, we have an action pack. It's under our resources, and there is a sheet on butterflies and moths, and Mike wrote it. And it includes a lovely, great table of the different species and what food plants they need for their caterpillars. And it's amazing how many grasses there are and how many long coarse grasses there are as well. So do have a look at that as well. I think you'll find that really useful. Gina says it would be great to see everyone's species across the country using the iNaturalist app. We encourage people to use iNaturalist. We find it really helpful. Is that one that you also use? Will the records get to you
No,
and to Butterfly
no,
Conservation
absolutely
that
not.
way? Absolutely not. Okay.
We always encourage iRecord. Now, the reason for that is with iRecord, it goes to our person that verifies the records. And if he has any queries, he can get back to the person easily to say, are you sure you saw a Camberwell beauty on your buddleia in spring? The answer is normally it's no. But with our naturalists, because of the data protection and all that sort of thing, we can't get back to people. So in short, all those records on our naturalists we can't use.
There is a way of setting your settings so you can. Our data manager went through that in the webinar earlier on in May.
Well, I might get our person to actually contact
the records are they're a minefield, aren't they? Because it's so useful, iNaturalist, because it encourages a photograph and it is easier for a first-time recorder. It's a much easier app to use. So I record often crashes just when you've put all of your records in or something like that. Okay, that's very useful information, Mike. I think we'll need to dig a little deeper on that one and see what we can do, because I thought the iNaturalist records all then went to iRecord. But they do, but not with the right permissions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not the expert to ask on that. I know from speaking to not only our recorder, but other recorders around the country, they don't encourage iNaturalist because of the problems they get in verifying records.
Okay. Ah, dear, because so many people are, including us, are encouraging use of it, and are able to get to the records. So I don't know what's going on there. So lots of people obviously saying thank you very much. Katrina asks about indicator species in her area, which is the north of Scotland, but also Catherine's who's also in the similar area in Scotland, has come in with various answers, including getting in touch with the species on the edge, because they have great yellow bumblebees close to their cemetery. It's really exciting and very rare, isn't it? That's an amazing thing to have, yeah.
Well, actually, I was talking to Tracy Monroe from Species on the Edge. Went to give the conference a couple of weeks back. And yes, the 5 indicator species would change. Now, The obvious one I would think of, which would change in Scotland, would include the Scot, depending on where you are, the Scot argus, because that's another indicator grassland species. You certainly got small heath up there. You don't have marbled white. You certainly have common blue and small copper, and it may need, I'd have to consult with somebody, may need changing the brown argus to the northern brown argus. But again, while she's still there, Tracy's probably the best person to talk to say, if you go out and you see some good grassland, what species would be expected to find there? And they might even reduce it to 3 species because it's on the northern edge, which again is acceptable.
Yeah. Katrina also asks about small blue butterflies, which are living within a few miles of the cemetery, and whether it's worth whether they can try and encourage them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was very impressed by the whole of the small blue team on eastern Scotland. The way, another concept we've come up with in Warwickshire is the butterfly bank, and they're using them quite widely over there. Now, Tyso burial ground down in Warwickshire, they've now put some butterfly banks in there, which again we're trying to encourage kidney vetch on. So if you've got the capacity to put a butterfly bank into a burial ground, again they vary tremendously, or nearby, then definitely I would encourage seeding it with kidney vetch. And I say the team up there, they've got small blue colonised several smaller butterfly banks than normally I'd recommend. So yes, please. And I think that would really help. And again, on the Back to the Edge project, what they've got is some gaps within the meta populations of these butterflies. So again, in Warwickshire, what you find is churchyards often are these gaps in the fragmented landscape. So great potential there to do things for all sorts of rare species.
Just perhaps you could give us a very, very quick summary of what you mean by butterfly bank.
Oh, sorry. Right.
We've run over by masses. It's
just
past one, but so very quickly, Mike. I don't.
Right. So very quickly, it's a earth bund made of subsoil and some aggregate in it, and so it's very warmer than the surrounding grasslands. And if you put certain wildflowers in there, from rock rose to northern brown argus to kidney vetch for the small blue, you can create a colony because the amount of egg laying opportunities in that small area is vastly more than in a whole field in general terms.
Great grave spoil comes to mind, I must say.
Yes. Again, we'd have the base of where the grave's dug as opposed to the topsoil on top.
Yes, put that at the bottom and the base soil at the top. Because at the moment, people often put it under the veteran yew tree, which exercises us a great deal because that's not at all good for the roots of the tree. But putting it in a sunny place and really trying to bury the topsoil is a great idea.
I have a fact sheet on butterfly banks if you want me to send that.
Yes, please. If you could send that to
Molly,
then
she could. It's a bit out of date, but yeah, I will send that to you.
Thank you. Leslie asked whether we're going to be sending the slides with the recording. What we normally do, if you're happy with this, Mike, is make a PDF.
Yeah, fine.
So that's easier to send out. Many people are saying what an interesting and informative presentation, and that there'll be Nadella is going to be monitoring. Hooray! Hey. Leslie asks whether there are any particular tree species for purple emperor.
Right. Generally, they need goat willow to breed on. But the tree species they're most associated with is oak. But they will actually, the males will what we call congregate on all sorts of tree species. They will also feed on the aphid honeydew of several species. But really, the abundance of them in a landscape is closely associated with how much goat willow you've got growing in the right locations.
Okay, thank you.
Which is semi-shade.
Thank you. Catherine has a question about green hay, whether you need to collect it back up after you've strewed it and trampled on it. Do you need to collect it back up, or is it? I mean, I've always thought it was all right. On the whole, you should always rake up, but
yeah,
just for that,
I should have mentioned this in the talk. But principle is often when you've left it down for 5 and 7 days in the sun, the amount of hay there is absolutely minimal because it's dried to a small percentage of what you put on there. The perfect way to do it is actually still to rake up that little bit and put it on your compost heap. In
Okay.
a agricultural situation, the fact is that cattle often or ponies are trampling that remaining bits of grey hay into the ground. Will sort it out for you. So again, it's a gut reaction. If you see it and it's still in lumps and there's a lot there, then it needs raking up.
Brilliant. Thank you. C. Tomlinson says, how would you encourage others in the PCC to embrace this wonderful way of tending churchyards? Please excuse the basic question. I need to convince not just PCC, but more broadly across various communities. I'm just going to give you a few little thoughts on that before Mike. The first would be start small. Ask if you can just do something small, maybe round the back of the churchyard. Say, could we just have this little strip by the wall to let it grow over the summer just for 4 months, 1 year? It's quite hard to say no to a little small area, particularly if it's not, central and very visible. So start small. And I think the other thing is to consult, because actually there's often a perception that people want to see a churchyard looking very neat and tidy, and it's not always true. It's not always true. It's always useful to consult, and then you test the water, you know the mood, and you perhaps can make your plans accordingly. Anything else you'd like to add, Mike?
Yeah, I'd add probably three things to that. First is um, it's always good through whatever newsletters, social media you've got, is to inform people not only what you're doing, but what you need, what you're hoping to achieve. So you invite them really to say, we're doing this to get the common blue here. This is the picture of the common blue. So then they start looking for the common blue, and then without knowing it, they're invested into what you're trying to achieve. And from experience, I've had people come to me and say, I haven't seen any of those. Okay, we'll try harder next time. So the other thing is, if you're looking to get more wildflowers in there, again, it's this business. Whereas I might encourage you to put lots of garlic mustard in, lady smock is a much more showy plant. So again, to keep people on your side, I would always go for putting showy wildflowers in initially, rather than ones that might be good for wildlife but not so pretty. And the final thing is we've used management data. There's a very case in a wood called Brandon Wood in Warwickshire, where the person out of about 10 people wanted to manage it for butterflies, and he got virtually taken to the cleaners. People didn't want it mown. And what he did was to set up a transept, involved all the people, including the mowners. And the very next year, all the mowners were saying, I don't see any butterflies here, which was exactly the place he wanted to cut down trees and make it more open for the butterflies. So I think those three tactics.
Very nice, thank you. Caroline makes a good point, which was that applying for an Eco Church Award helped our PCC to move away from the short grass syndrome. So yeah, that's another very useful, very church-specific tip.
I was going to say also, I don't know if you get it all around the country, but we have Britain in blue, and locally we have a rugby in blue. I'm trying to convince the people running that to have a particular award for the best wildlife churchyard in Rugby. So again, it gives that award system for what you're doing and recognition.
Yeah, all good. Catherine Lloyd makes another good comment on this, which is something that we very much recommend, which is just try and encourage them to just mow a little less short, lift the cutter bar, and then you
Yeah,
get a lot of low flowering species able to bloom. It's also easier to manage. It is difficult to have long grass and then cut it and get rid of the grass, the big piles of grass. It is a challenge for some people. So that is a way that really can get you a lot of flowers without upsetting people who might be concerned about long grass.
and it creates
You need to
corridors
be
as well.
collecting though. You do need to be picking the grass cuttings off as you always do. Yeah, yeah. Does indeed make corridors. Thank you. I think that is it for questions. So yes. Thank you so much, Mike. That was absolutely brilliant. But the fact that it's now 23 minutes past just shows how much interest you've generated with your brilliant talk. I think we all thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure everybody learnt a lot, even people who thought that they knew quite a bit about butterflies to start with. Really, really interesting. And yeah, please do join us for the last two. We've got lichens tomorrow with Mary Steer, who's the president of the Lichen Society. And then we've got Dr. Kath Price from the Shropshire Wildlife Trust talking about urban wildlife and how churchyards, cemeteries, chapel yards can be so important in an urban environment. So if you haven't already signed up, please do. Okay, thank you very much, Mike.
Bye.